guess the first thing to explain is how to remove the magazine release, which is held together, which is retained, I should say, by this spring. It's right here. You can see two top edges, they hump. Now that spring is kind of like in an S shape that's sandwiched together. The easiest way to take this out is not to remove the spring, but I take a punch and I place it into one of the loops of the spring and I pull the spring up. It doesn't work every time, but there we go. So now you can see the spring is up, and once that is pulled out far enough, you can just simply drop out the magazine release. Simple as that. Yeah, the spring just basically goes through that slot and retains it. So just center up to replace it. Just center up the magazine release and take another punch. I just take this one, push the spring down, and that's it. Back in. Very easy. Now to remove the guts. Technically, you don't have to remove, I forget what this is called, but the rail section here. You can drive out this top pin and remove the bar, but found it just easier to take this out. Now I don't do this a lot because this isn't a tapered pin. This is, I measured it and it's even, it's non-directional, and it's simply friction fit. So over time, because it's just interfaces with polymer, it'll become loose. I've already noticed that it's become loose in just a couple of times that I've done this. But now to remove it, you have to remove this pin that it acts as a pivot point for both the slide release, and the trigger bar, which it's very simple. It's retained just by spring, which you'll see. Just take a punch, and it doesn't matter which side. And you're just going to put it right there. I probably could just even use this. It's not a very difficult thing to remove. And just give it a good wrap. Oh, yeah. That's it. Now you can see how it's notched, and a spring clicks down and retains that. And you'll see that once I remove the pin. If you can, I'm not sure if you can see inside. A second. Flashlight's dead. Well, you can use your imagination. It just slots in, and the spring retains that. Now, this all here is just not attached to anything anymore. It's just held in there by interfering with each other, but they won't come out. As you can see, there's nothing really holding it in besides everything interfering. It'll slide up and down and all around, and it will not come out. So you have to take out the cage, which is pretty straightforward. Take a pin, and like I said, I measured this pin, and it is symmetrical and non-directional. So, pick a side, and the pin is out. Pin's out, put it away. Now that you can just rotate the takedown lever out, which is also retained by a spring in this notch here. I forgot to mention that once you release this pin, spring tensioner is relieved off of this as well. They just kind of slide out. Pin is out, and nothing is retaining the cage, which can just be lifted straight out. You saw fly out is the little spring. Now this spring does a lot of work. So not only does this spring retain this pin, like so, it'll just slide in there, It also interfaces with the takedown lever and locks that into place. And this trailing leg here applies pressure on this point here, which pushes the slide lock and slide release down, as well as the trigger bar. So it does a lot of work with one spring, which is pretty good, because you just have one part to replace. You don't have multiple springs doing multiple jobs. So there's your slide lock, slide release, and your trigger assembly just pulls right out. Now, besides the magazine release, which we replaced after taking it out, that's the only thing that's left in this frame. And that's it, really. You can see the trigger bar pivots on here. Now, the little safe action trigger does have a small spring in there, as you can see. Now you can drive out this roll pin, disassemble that, and drive this out, which is friction fit, and you can. There's really just no point. You can just stick this assembly in your cleaning solution and you'll be fine. Also, it gives you access if you want to polish these up for smoother action, whatever you want to do. I'm pretty privy towards that. I like to tinker, clearly, because I took this apart. Just like to know how everything works. So, in order to reassemble, trigger, bar, the release, and spring. Now what I do is I just kind of place this leg of the spring in between the slide release and the trigger bar. It makes it a little easier, so you're not dealing with tension when you're trying to align a bar or the retaining rod, the pivot bar. It just makes it a little easier. Now, with that all in place, we can press the cage back down. And just retains all of that in there. There we go. And just making sure everything is clear. And press down. Just give it a little tap to make sure it's all seated. And take your pin, pick a side, any side, and drive the sucker home. I'll use this brass punch because transfer energy. There we go. Just use this to drive it a little just further home. Keep it all symmetrical. There we go. So that's back in place. Now you can take your bar, this pivot bar, and we can place that back in. Doesn't really matter which way. I use a punch to just line up all the components, and once they are all located, pin will just slide right through and push down, and it should just kind of lock in place there. Now the spring the spring here that puts tension down on the bar, or the release, needs to be located, which is a fairly simple affair. The reason why I choose to do this, now I know I'm fatiguing the spring by putting it out in a direction that's not supposed to go, but I'd rather line up one spring that I can see than lining up 6 things that I can't. So that's why I choose to do this. It's just, if I can see it, makes it a little easier. Okay. Well, it's easy whenever it's just me, not working behind a camera. It doesn't want to clear. No, you know. Well, another way you can do is press this back out again. Guess if you want to do it this way, it'll work too. With the spring, just replace the spring back on top of the bar. There. Oop. I'm just pushing it to the outside of the slide release slide lock. And I'm trying to pull it back up. A little pick would be very handy here, but I don't feel like looking for it. So that's how that spring rests on top of the bar, giving it tension. Now with that, we can line this back up and relocate the pin. And there we go. Now this will click into place once it's seated properly. There we go. Okay. That's all done. And finally, it is the takedown lever, which you can just take another punch, and there's a spring, that leg of the spring there. You can see that it is obstructing the hole. You can just take your lever. Now there's a little, has a little notch. You can just kind of push it out of the way like that. Now if you can't get the hang of it, then you can use a punch, but it's the little flat cutout area that they have there. It lines up perfectly. I feel like this is intentional. It lines up perfectly with that spring. And you rotate that to cam the spring out of the way, and then replace it. It slides right into place. And like I said, I feel like that was intentional. And it just rotates into place and locks. And that's it. So that was the video series of complete disassembly and reassembly of the, well, I guess I can put everything back together. Might as well. The video's already a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Just to have a complete gun again. And we'll do, having issues. Doing everything off frame. You have nothing to look at. Sorry. Alright. Okay. Looks good. And like I said, I push that away. Lift up on the trigger bar. Index it. And slot it on through. And slot. There we go. Good. Seat it down. And line everything up. Make sure it's all lined up. Place the pin and start to tab it. Now, because this is two pieces here, they have a tendency to become misaligned. As you can see, I can push these independently of one another, which then causes interference. So don't wail on it. Just kind of keep realigning, checking, making sure you see that pin is center, and just start tapping at home. You don't have to keep messing around with it. Make sure that this is flush down against the frame and flush to the rear of the beaver tail. If that isn't, it won't go through. And there we go.